It's me already does it. One thing you need to learn as young and as soon as possible. Not too young, but you get what I'm saying. One thing needs to get through to you is that some people don't want to move on. What is moving on? Moving on is processing the past and admitting to yourself that you need to become a better human being. That is moving on. So moving on is an inside job. Moving away is simply, just like the term says, moving away from a situation or relationship. So if you were married to your ex-husband and you divorced him and now with another man, you moved away from that marriage, now you're in another marriage. Does that automatically mean you moved on? What if in your previous marriage there were conflicts and you decided to ask for a divorce? Now you're with a man that doesn't challenge you in those areas. Did you move on? No, you moved away from your ex-husband, but you're still in the same place psychologically. Let me tell you, a lot of people confuse moving away with moving on. Just because someone moves away doesn't mean they've moved on. It's quite common for people to move away while they never move on. For example, you can have a relative who saw you when you were 5 years old, and at 5 years old you said something very loud that others considered rude, and it hurt your feelings. Now you're 25, 20 years later, and they have this issue against you. They dislike you. They always want to downplay your achievements. Why? Because they never moved on from that moment where they felt hurt by what you said when you were 5 years old. Did you intend to hurt people at 5 years old? No. They were hypersensitive and they took things personally what a 5-year-old said. Who in the right mind does something like that? But they did. They had over 20 years to realize that they were wrong for being so easily offended by a 5-year-old. They were wrong for expecting a 5-year-old to look after their feelings. Nobody should expect it from a 5-year-old. And here's the thing, they blamed you, the 5-year-old, for how they were feeling. And they developed a negative attitude towards you. So for the past 20 years, while you were growing up, they were a negative factor in your life. So they were contributing to harm towards you by disliking you. So they did you wrong. And you have to face yourselves, repent, and become better human beings. No. They don't want to look at themselves in the mirror. They just want to escape. So they felt hurt, so it must be you, the 5-year-old, who did something. Even though you're not a 5-year-old anymore, you're 25, or even in your 30s, they'll keep being upset with you. And they look for reasons. Well, they can't find reasons. They'll make excuses why the issues against you. Why? Because they refuse to move on. Let me tell you, not everyone wants to move on. Look, some people are a bit antisocial. Why? Because in the past they were taken advantage of or they were psychologically abused. But did they get therapy? Did they get counseling? Did they look for improvement to heal, recover, and become better and safer human beings? No. They began to cope by being antisocial, sometimes even violent. They love to threaten people in a subtle way. They love to suggest that they love to use suggestive witchcraft. They are now endorsing gaslighting people, stonewalling people. They've become narcissistic. Why? Because they don't want to move on. They became attached to the coping mechanisms and they began to identify with the coping mechanisms. They say, well, it's just the way I am. Oh, but here's the thing. They're never that way towards us, towards their employer, a police officer, or a judge, or anyone who can strike back. So you know that they're bullshitting you. They don't want to move on. It has nothing to do with the trauma they've went through. They just don't want to move on. That's it. And one thing you need to understand, people that don't want to move on, they'll have to come up with excuses for why they're so dysfunctional. Okay, listen. If someone is dysfunctional, but you can clearly see they're making efforts ahead in life, now that's different. It simply means that the dysfunction they have is deep-rooted and it needs a lot of care for them to heal and recover. But if you can see that they are making effort, that means they're breaking ties with toxic people, they're facing themselves, they're in therapy, or they make effort in life to be better, When you see them making effort, that's what matters. They have moved on, but just because you move on does not mean that you are fully recovered. Moving on is part of the healing and recovery process. Moving on is also a natural thing to do as a human being. For example, when you were 5 years old, when you were 2 years old, you had those tiny shoes. Can you fit your grown man or grown woman's foot or feet in those tiny shoes? No. You outgrew those shoes. Now, what's the difference between outgrowing something or someone and moving on from something or someone? Let me explain the difference. There's not much of a difference, but it comes down to this. When you outgrow something, it doesn't fit you anymore. For example, the tiny shoes you wore when you were 2 years old, you can't even think about putting them on now you're 20 or 25 or 30. It's not going to work. You outgrew it. The same way, you outgrew wearing diapers. Well, at least I hope you did. You outgrew needing parental supervision when you need to go to bed. There's certain things you outgrow. Or let's say now that your grandfather passed away, or let's say there was a loved one that passed away. It hurt you, and now you end up playing video games after with other people, and you playing video games for a long time was your way of dealing with the loss of that loved one. But eventually, you mourned about it, you grieved about it, and you process internally. And because you internally process the death of the loved one, you've moved on. And because you moved on, now you will outgrow this intense video gaming. There's nothing wrong with playing video games, absolutely not. But if you were playing video games over and over again because you were dealing with a trauma and that was a good distraction for you, eventually you will outgrow that distraction once you move on. Now, if you don't move on, then you will be trapped in playing video games and it becomes an addiction onto you. So moving on comes first, then you outgrow things. Once you move on, you outgrow the dysfunction you were in. Once you move on, you outgrow the conflicts around you. So moving on comes first, that's internally, and then you outgrow things. It means you're not comfortable around certain things anymore, and now you develop psychologically, you develop in a social way. But let me tell you one thing. A lot of people are faking it. They never moved on. And it's a strange thing. They don't even intend to move on. But they cannot get away with this in daily life. The dysfunction will turn into defects and that will haunt them. So they will mask it. That's why they need people around who are worse off than them, so that when others look at them, they'll say, well, you're at least you're not homeless, at least you're not this, at least you're not that. They want some people around them who are worse off than them. They will keep them close on purpose, just so that others, when they see them, will compare them to those worse off people. Others will feel more comfortable around them. Because remove those people who are worse off than them, and others will clearly see their defects, and they don't want that. Some people will keep you around as long as you're worse off than them in some area. If there's something about you that's worse off than them, they will keep you around. Why? Because they can always point that out. Or by having you around, being worse off than them in some area, others will notice what's wrong with you and not what's wrong with them. The moment you move on and you outgrow and you heal and recover, they don't want anything to do with you anymore. They suddenly kick you out because now they can't use you to escape anymore. Look, moving on is not as common as we think it is. Moving away is. Stop calling move away moving on because it's not the same thing. You can move away from the kitchen after you finish cooking. You can move away from the bedroom after you wake up from sleeping. You can move away from a job by quitting your job. You can move away from a field after the festival's over. So moving away is just that, moving away. That doesn't mean you moved on. Okay, let's say now that someone acted shitty. But then they forgot about how shitty they acted, and now they don't act shitty anymore. And I expect everyone else to forget how shitty they used to be. No, 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 no. That is not moving on. That's moving away. You have to admit you were shitty. You have to admit that you hurt other people. You have to admit that some people will not trust you anymore and deal with it. That's moving on. But some people are narcissistic. They may admit the fact that they weren't that pleasant, that they weren't that safe, but then they expect you to just, this is your problem now, it affects you, not mine. They always want to put it on the people they affected the wrong way. Now, of course, the people that they affected the wrong way, or you can say the quote-unquote victims, they also need to move on. They also need to face things. But it doesn't cancel out their contribution. Some people don't want to admit any contribution of themselves when it comes to bad things because they don't want to move on. Listen to me. Not everyone wants to move on. They won't say this in your face. I don't want to move on. I don't want to improve. I don't want to heal or recover. I just want to keep escaping and be left alone. They won't tell you that. Because when you keep on escaping, you're not only hurting yourself, you're also hurting other people. That's where the phrase comes from. Hurt people, hurt people. They do not want to improve. So that means they feel entitled to be dysfunctional. They feel entitled to be broken. They feel entitled to cope by leeching off of other people. They feel entitled to not only endanger themselves, also endanger other people. Look, some people do not want to move on. Let's say you shook someone's hand 20 years ago and you shook it a bit hard and they became uncomfortable. If they the same day don't address the fact they felt uncomfortable by the way you shook their hands and just process, okay, it happens, he didn't harm me, he didn't sexually harass me, none of that. If they don't process the same day, but the next day they're still upset about it, that means they have an issue. They don't want to move on. You shaking their hand a bit hard was not a crime. They just felt uncomfortable with it. So they need to admit they were uncomfortable and deal with it. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are uncomfortable, not you. If they keep blaming you for how they feel, listen, you didn't continue to shake their hand in a hard way. So why are they still upset with that one incident when you shook their hands in a hard way? It is because they're using that event, they're using that thing that happened as an excuse not to move on. Look, if you raped someone or sexually assaulted someone, that would have been different. That may take a while for them to process it. But if then, at some point, they have to process it, they have to move on and outgrow the situation. I'm not condoning any negative behavior towards anyone. I'm just saying, if they're upset because something you did or didn't do, that doesn't automatically mean that you were wrong or guilty. But whether you're guilty or not, that doesn't matter. They have to process it and move on. But let me tell you, a lot of people do not want to move on. They do not. Now, why is this important to realize? What if you continue, what if you continuously have marriage problems? There's conflict all the time in the household. And you keep thinking, what am I doing wrong? Let's go into marriage therapy together. You want the marriage to work. But then you figure out that, hold on a minute. It's not me. Even the therapist or say the psychologist you both go to tells you it's not you. And then one day she says, well, when I was in high school, this guy hugged me and I wasn't comfortable with it. I was a bit overwhelmed. I said it afterwards and the guy apologized. Okay, that's something that happened. That happened when you were 15 and now you're in your 30s or 40s. Why did you even bring this thing up? It was resolved back then. Did the guy ever hug you like that again? No. Did the guy keep his distance? Yes, he did. So why are you still upset about that? And by the way, did the guy have a negative intent? No, he had no negative intent. It was just that you were uncomfortable with it. You were uncomfortable and he didn't force himself on you. afterwards. So what's the problem? The problem is her. She does not want to move on. She just wants to escape. Her being angry with that guy for the thing that happened gave her a sense of power. She had no power, but she felt like she had power. And she became accustomed to use her emotions to attempt to control other people. She would use her own mood to affect other people's mood. She would get upset, angry, or accuse other people of hurting her feelings just to have some grip over other people. So she became accustomed to use witchcraft on other people. See, she became accustomed to emotional witchcraft. And that's how she is treating you right now. Now, in the beginning, when you were dating, before you got married, it was a honeymoon phase. She showed her best behavior. She acted the best way possible. Once you put a ring on her finger and she was secured, now she could show her true self, which is being manipulative, being this toxic, manipulative, as I say it, by being witchy towards you, using her emotions to kind of try to control you. Now, it's now that her actual default behavior comes to the surface, you think, well, what happened? Things used to be so good, let's go to therapy. Your perception is wrong. That's how she always has been. And that incident in high school is not the reason why she ended up that way. Okay, that incident happened, it affected her. But why did she hold on to what happened to her? Because she now found a way to escape. She always wanted to escape, and now she could use that incident that happened in high school. It wasn't sexual assault, it wasn't rape, it wasn't anything that grievous, but she used it as an excuse to remain upset. And later, she couldn't justify remaining upset with a guy. She began to look for other things to be upset about. She's addicted to playing the victim, to being the one that needs sympathy. She never moved on. And it's now you figure it out. But she wants you to think it's you. And now you end up stressed out, even depressed, because your marriage ain't working. So she is psychologically abusing you. Now, was she an abuser at age 15? No. But over time, she became an abuser because she refused to move on and she refused to be responsible towards herself and towards the community. There are also guys doing things like this. So I'm not picking on the ladies over here. There are a lot of men who don't want to move on. Yes, I said a lot of men who don't want to move on. They don't. But they are not as good as women when it comes to excuses. Because in general, people don't take excuses from men that lightly. When women come with excuses, to some extent, people will kind of tolerate it. But when it comes to men, nobody accepts excuses from men. Even if a man has a good reason, they often say it's just an excuse. Just understand that when people refuse to move on, they've made up their minds that they'll rather ruin themselves and everyone else in the process than to be a healthy participant of the community. Let me say this one more time. When someone refuses to move on, they've made up their mind that they'll rather ruin themselves and others in the process than to be a healthy participant of the community. Because being a healthy participant of the community requires responsibility, requires accepting obligations, and it means facing challenges. Now, it's not only them that should be doing this. Everyone should be a healthy participant of the community. Everyone should want to be a healthy participant of the community. But is that the case in the world? No, it's not. So if not everyone wants to be a healthy participant, that means that there are people out there who just want to be leeches. They just want to use people and escape. They want to use people and escape. It's a one-way street. It's a one-way traffic. One-way recognition. You ought to consider them as priority, but they never consider you as priority. And if they ever consider you, it's only because there's something they can get out of you. they're prioritizing their own expectations or their own needs or their own escape. It's not that they're prioritizing you. So when they act towards you as if they're prioritizing you, it's not really you they're prioritizing. It can be they just want attention, or they want sympathy, or they want sex, or there's something they want and you're able to give to them. That's why they treat you in a better way. It's not that you are a priority. You're just a tool they're using. So not actually prioritizing you, but they expect you to prioritize them and will stay their expectations and what they want. But the other way around, you're also an option towards them. Look, it's one thing to have difficulty moving on because you need to process something that's quite traumatic. That's one thing. You want to move on, but it's not that easy. That's one thing. It's one thing to be slow in moving on because the thing you need to process is quite intense. It's another thing not wanting to move on. If someone has difficulty moving on, you can deal with an individual like that at arm's length. You can. You can motivate them. You can offer them suggestions how to get help. You can deal with such people. But when someone refuses to move on, listen. Don't argue with them. Don't get upset. Don't get offended. Don't confront them. Slowly and peacefully remove yourself from them. Lower contact and fade away from them. That's what you need to do. There's no need to cause conflict and drama. Just slowly and peacefully move away from them and stop being involved with them eventually. Because such people, they've made up their minds that, let me say this, they rejected life. They embraced death over life. That's what they've done. They've embraced death over life. So that means that they're not interested in life itself. Now they're interested in escaping, so they may be quite active in sports or quite active at work, but just because they're quite active in social activities doesn't mean that they're living life to the full. All those activities may be just a way to escape. They've embraced death over life. So they may appear like they've moved on. They may appear like they're always moving on, but they're not. Again, moving on is something internal. How do you know when someone has moved on or moving on? They improve. Their opinions, the things they are attached to, how they feel and relate to other people improves. They become more peaceful, they become more Christ-like. You're either heading towards conformity to the image of Christ, or you're heading towards reprobation. There's no such thing as going in both directions. A human being is either heading towards conformity to Christ, or they're heading towards reprobation, to be utter destruction. It's one of the two. Now, someone that refuses to move on, can they change their mind? Yes, they can, and they can move on. But are you guaranteed will move on? No, you're not guaranteed. So when you notice that they refuse to move on, slowly remove yourself from them. Because you cannot change them for the better. And here's the thing. People that refuse to move on, that pain that comes with not moving on, they will project it on someone else. That's why so many people out there have someone they dislike. When you look at the people they dislike versus the people who actually harms them or who are a threat towards them, you think, hold on a minute. You can't stand these people. But these people are no threat towards you. But you have people around here who did you dirty, who did you wrong, and don't even want to apologize. How come you have so much dislike or even hate towards these people over here, but actual people who are of a harmful effect towards you, you have such feelings or attitude towards them? That is because they're just escaping, and the pain that comes with not moving on, they want to project it on someone else. So they want to blame someone else for them not moving on. That's what goes on. So, if someone is difficulty moving on, they have difficulty. So be it. They have difficulty. At least they want to move on. They can be assisted. If someone refuses to move on and you notice this, then slowly remove yourself from the individual. And don't just look at an incident or two. Look at the whole situation and look at the whole individual. Is this human being willing to improve and become better? Are they willing to give up their coping mechanisms and actually heal and recover? If they're not, slowly move away. As simple as that. You already moved on, which is good. They don't. And listen, people that refuse to move on, if they persist like this, eventually they will become narcissists, eventually will become reprobate. The reprobate, or what the world calls a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath, is an individual that they resist moving on and they fight moving on. Moving on is something they vow themselves never to do. That's why they are self-destructive like that. Well, don't be too close to them. Don't even be around them so that they won't draw you into their self-destruction. Keep moving on, keep outgrowing, and keep agreeing with Christ. Be at peace.